Welcome back as we continue discussing the legislative branch or Congress, and we move on from the power dynamics and structures of the Senate and the House of Representatives. We move on to the committee system. So within the House and Senate operates what we call a committee system. Members of Congress cannot all examine every single bill that comes through there, or we would never get policy initiated. It simply takes too long and is too complicated with a nation of our size and scope. So what we've developed is a committee system in which our elected officials are organized onto a committee, and then they will hear bills that fall within that specific category. The House has 20 committees, permanent committees, while the Senate has 16, each of them focusing on a variety of topic areas from agriculture to armed services, the budget, ethics, foreign affairs, homeland security, intelligence, the judiciary, space science and technology, and so on. So an individual member of Congress is elected, they get assigned to a committee, and those will be the bills that they hear about specifically within the committee setting. Then they will all collectively be seen together on the floor when they vote as a whole on whether or not that policy should pass. Now, there are 4 types of committees that exist within the House and Senate. We just discussed the first category, which is standing or permanent committees. Those are the ones that will always exist. Fewer than 10% of what goes into committees actually reaches the floor. That's where the term dies in committee comes from. Most bills die in committee, being picked apart by the partisan members that belong to each major political party that sit within that committee. The second type of committee is what we call a joint committee. These are fashioned with appointed members from both the House and the Senate, and they are charged with exploring a key issue such as the economy or taxes or some very large policy area like healthcare, and they're made up of both parties, both chambers. A conference committee is called upon to reconcile differences when both chambers do not pass identical bills. So the House and Senate can only pass a bill that goes to the president's desk if it is identical. If the House and Senate pass 2 different bills, they will be forced to host what's called a conference committee, to iron out those differences. Finally, we have what's known as a special or select committee, which is temporary in nature and is set to just target on a very specific topic of the time, like the January 6th committee, or something that's looking at a very specific issue that is specific to that moment. Each committee has a committee chair which serves for 6 years at a time unless their party loses the upcoming election and they no longer have a majority. These committees are a vital functioning element of our congressional system. So let's take a look at how we pass laws then with this lovely graphic here. Bills become law very simply. They are introduced in Congress by either the House or the Senate. It does not matter where they originate or who wrote the bill, as long as it is presented in one of those 2 houses first. Once it is introduced in either the House or the Senate, it moves through a very straightforward process. It goes to the committees. It either dies in the committee or moves to the floor. It either gets voted on the floor or dies there. The floor vote is taken and the bill is sent to the other house, whichever one it didn't start in. If each chamber, the House and Senate, pass the same identical bill, it moves on to the president. If not, they have to form a conference committee to iron out those details, as we discussed before. If they can't, the bill dies. If they can, it continues on to the final phase, which is to the president's desk. The president has 10 days to sign a bill into law. If they sign it, it becomes law. If they veto it, it goes back to Congress, and Congress has to reassemble a 2/3 majority to get it overruled, right? Which is kind of difficult since we operate under a plurality system. Most bills are passed with 51%. So if a president vetoes it, it will have to go back and garner even more support to undo it. Or a president can sit on it, which we call a pocket veto, where he doesn't necessarily veto it, he just simply never signs it into law. Now, that can only happen under certain circumstances. If a president does that too close to the end of the calendar session in which Congress meets, the Constitution says that the president cannot do that. So it can only happen under certain circumstances, and it's even rarer today. Most bills that come to the president's desk are expected to be signed. So, what you end up with then is the classic legislative process. You will have an assessment that analyzes this, but basically, this is the process in a nutshell. The Senate and the House operate under their own procedures, having some that overlap in which they utilize the process for bills to become law. Now, because of our modern political processes and the inputs we have on our governmental system, the classic process, which I just showed you, is not always necessarily how a bill will move through the congressional process. Instead, because of the inputs we see, special interests, other influences, we see all of the ranges and committees of government, which are shown here, the committee systems within Congress, are all competing for the same influence, the same spending, the same power, and thus they're all fighting through the same funnel, and very little actually becomes passed. And because of these influences, we've created this very hopscotch network in which an individual bill can become law, meaning there are a multitude of phases in which the bill can die before it actually gets there. In the following unit, we focus on the executive branch, namely the office of the president, and we will continue that in the next video.